Welcome to Americana Archives. Travel back in time with us as we go throughout America's historic newspapers to find the lost and forgotten history of America. Today's story comes from the great state of Maine, being reported in the Ellsworth American of September 28, 1898. Today's headline is Over the Trail. It says, "I took a ride in one of them palace cars while I was gone," said Hank, as he took a seat on a box in the shade of a big mesquite tree in front of the cookhouse where the boys of the day shift generally congregate after supper to smoke and talk over the incidents of the day. The first morning, we was clipping along through a country that I knowed every foot of. Used to drive a stage over it for Uncle Ben Halliday, a matter of 40 years ago. I knowed every valley, crick, foothill, and mountain butte. I knowed we was coming to the head of Devil's Gulch, where Jump Up Johnny used to live, before the Rapahoes got him, and I began to wonder if they would go down the trail at the gate we was knocking off then. I sort of grabbed the seat and held on, but sir, they dropped over the hills so easy that if I'd have shut my eyes, I would not have knowed it. He grabbed the seat, and yet day after day, down that same gulch on a worse trail, he had sent 6 thoroughbreds on a dead run, dragging after them a swaying stagecoach, where the fall of a horse or the slip of a wheel would have hurled all to destruction. The last time I pulled Uncle Ben Halliday over that trail, we was jumped by Rapahoes. We didn't happen to have any outbound passengers that morning, only me and Uncle Ben, and the express and the mail. We was a-sailing along when I noticed some pony tracks in the trail, and says to Uncle Ben, "Get the gun ready, for we are apt to be jumped by Indians." Just then, we topped a little rise, and there was a band of Rapahoes about 400 yards away. "Take a shot at 'em," I says. I had a good Henry rifle, and Uncle Ben blazed away, for some reason missed, and they come for us. Uncle Ben got sort of white about the mouth, but settled down in the seat and says quiet like, "I guess we better move along, Hank." "All right," I says, "hold tight." There was nothing but thoroughbreds on Uncle Ben's lines through the Indian countries. He wouldn't have a hoss that could not do his mile in less than 2 minutes on them runs, and I'll bet he thanked his God for it that day. Maybe we didn't go. You bet I kept my foot off the brake and made that 20-foot lash whistle and snap over them thoroughbreds' backs. This with the Indians yelling and shooting behind sent us into the willows ahead of time. I begun to blow my horn long before we got to the station, and the stock tenders and guards knowed there was something wrong and came out to meet us. When the Indians saw them, they went the other way. Well, sir, the Rapahoes used to run me into the stations time and again. I've had the coach riddled with bullets and arrows, and once I went into a station with an arrow in the flank of the nigh wheeler. One time I remember I had an army colonel and his wife and children, a captain and his wife and their servants, all bound for Fort Laramie. We was jumped by Indians and piled the mail and cushions about the women and children in the bottom of the stage and started in to make a running fight. Them officers was dead game, you bet, and for miles and miles, we put up the prettiest running fight that a man would want to see. It was touch and go for lots of time, but as we got close to a station, they heard us a-shooin' and come out. At first the Indians thought they would come on, but the stock tenders had long-range rifles and knowed how to use them, and them Indians was soon a-huntin' for a thick hill a long ways off. I forgot them officers' names, but I bet if they're a-livin', they remember me and that day's ride on the Laramie Trail. An army officer's life was no picnic them days. I used to throw off the brake, put the bud to the 6-horse team, tie the lines to a seat brace, take my Henry, and drop on my knees in the front boot and shoot over the seat. Many and many's the single-headed run-and fight I've put up that way. Sometimes I'd be jumped by the Indians 2 or 3 times in one day's drive of 75 miles. It was about all the excitement there was in them days that a fellow could really enjoy. We'd drive over our division of 75 miles in one day and back the next. Generally there was 4 or 5 stations with changes of horses on the run. But as we whooped it along in that palace car, I reckon it come to me more than ever that times is changing and that I am getting old. But I pinched myself to see if I was awake. Over on that hill is where Eunuch Smith and his gang of bullwhackers was corralled by Cheyennes and lost all their stock and over 2/3 of the men before one of the boys got back from Fort Laramie with the soldiers. I see there's a schoolhouse on the hill now. Up that little gulch running off the valley yonder was where the vigilantes rounded up Wart-Nose Johnson and his crowd and lynched the whole gang. There's a farmhouse now at the mouth of the gulch and a big crop of corn in the valley below. At a town where we stopped for noon, I drove up to once alone to find the only house then in the town, a stage station, burned down, the station keeper and the stock tenders killed, scalped, half roasted and chopped up, and the stock drove off. I had to drive to the next station without change of horses. Now it's a big town with trolley cars and such, and there I was getting along at 40 miles an hour, I reckon, smoking a 2-bit cigar, and all I had to do was to press a little button, and a man in uniform would fetch me liquor. Change? It was the same everywhere. Up on the Walla Walla division, the country is all settled up and changed. But you couldn't fool old Hank on the rivers and mountains. I drove once alone, from Walla Walla to the Dales, 240 miles in about 18 hours. Them river Indians up in that country was bad too. Cowardly cusses, sneaking, crawling, shooting from bushes, and won't give you anything like as fair a fight as the Indians east of the Rockies. The way of that drive was this. I had just got in off my 75-mile run, washed up, had my supper, dressed, and was starting for a dance down in the bottoms when I met the Wells Fargo office agent coming a-rushing up the street. Hank, he says, I was hunting you. We're in a devil of a fix. We've got nearly $10,000 in gold bullion just come in that's due in the Dales by tomorrow night at the close of business hours, or one of our best shippers stands to lose a lot of money already paid on a mine. It ought to have been down yesterday, but our downstage throwed a wheel and missed the regular connection for the Dales. I've been to the stage office, but Hayworth says for me to see you. What can you do? Get the bullion to the Dales by noon tomorrow. But it's 240 miles. Nobody knows that better than I do, Mr. Price, but you get your bullion ready, and in half an hour send it down to the stage stables in a wagon. And I went on down the street. The superintendent was still at the stables. Did you see Price, Hank? Yes, sir, I says. Can you make it? Sure thing, I says. All right, pick your teams. I had the stock tenders hook up 6 horses that I picked out. Then went to the boarding house, changed my clothes, and went back to the stables with 2 2-gallon demijohns of whiskey. Price was there with the bullion. It weighed just 404 pounds. I had him put it in the bottom of the stage and throw a lot of sacked feed on top of it. Then I climbed up to the seat. 3 or 4 shotgun messengers started to follow me, and I said, Hold up, gentlemen. One man's enough on this trip. The only trouble that I'm likely to run into, that I can't handle myself, is at Willow Springs, where there's always a crowd of rustlers. One man may get through all right, but if they're looking for trouble or suspicion anything, you fellows wouldn't last as long as a snowball in hell. You'd only be an advertisement for trouble. I had my way and drove off with the bullion, feed, and 4 gallons of whiskey, and knowed that if I passed Willow Springs all right, I'd make it. The Springs was the toughest place on the road, and whenever there was a holdup, we could bank on it being by some of that Willow Springs gang, made up as if it was of cattle rustlers, hoss thieves, road agents, and all-around bad men. Hayworth had given me a pointer that he thought the gang was looking for the bullion, and the last thing he said was, Now, Hank, look out for your team and yourself. Let the express go if it comes to a showdown. I got to the Springs long in the night. Toward morning, I was hitting the trail mighty fast, I tell you. I knowed there'd be a gang there, for at the last station I passed, they told me that the regular had been held up the morning before. So long before I got to the station, I commenced whooping and yelling and singing as loud as I could, and sure enough, when I rolled up, there was about 20 of the toughest looking fellows you ever saw, all heeled, and didn't look like they had been to bed. Lord, wasn't I drunk, woo-wee. Most of them knowed me, and the antics I cut made 'em laugh. I was too drunk to pay any attention to the station keeper or the stock tenders, but I grabbed one of the demijohns and yelling for the boys to come on. I staggered into the house. I poured about a half a pint of good strong whiskey into each one of them fellas, and in my drunken way managed to tell 'em that I was taking the coach down to replace an old one on the south end and had a load of food for the way stations. I told the station keeper that 5 of the sacks of grain on top was for him, and for him to have it taken out. Then I sang another drunken song and staggered out to the coach for the other demijohn. I reeled up to the coach, where the station keeper was taking out the grain, and spoke quick and low. I'm running extra to the Dales with bullion. Have the tenders change my team for the freshest and best you've got. Quick, man. Oh, I'm a jolly stage driver. Stay with it, boys. Here's more. And I staggered back with the other demijohn. Well, sir, in 15 minutes, I had that gang fixed. Plenty. What wasn't on the floor or the ground outside was a trying to fight over the balance of the whiskey. I saw my team was hitched up and made a run and jump for the front boot, grabbed the lines, and how I did cut loose from there. Well, I eat my dinner in the Dales and got mighty well paid for that trip. The Willow Springs gang held up the regular that followed me the next day. They was dead on that the bullion was due all right. Coming back, I struck a wagon train of 15 families, and they was in trouble. The cussed Indians and made a rush and stampeded some of their hosses. You could see the Indians, 5 or 6 of them, a-driving the hosses across the valley 2 or 3 miles away. The women and children in the train were crying and yelling, pretty nigh scared to death. The men was scared too, and didn't know how they were going to pull out. I wasn't on scheduled time, so took out a leader, tied the others up, grabbed my Henry off the seat, and yelled for 5 men to come on. The Indians was heading for a mountain, but I knowed the country too well to believe that they was going there, so rode to head 'em off below. My thoroughbred was too fast for the others, and I was soon in range. I cut loose and unloaded 2 ponies, and the other Indians left the hosses and cut for shelter. I headed the train hosses back and met the other fellows coming up. I reckon my soul's all right if them women's blessings is any good. I told them to hook up and pull right out of there, and I did not have to tell them twice. This article originally came from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Thank you for joining us today. Remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.